I'm totally smashing both stereotypes really, aren't I? But it's nice to be able to push myself in different ways, and I feel really fortunate that I've had both of those opportunities.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. We certainly had a very eventful Olympics in Paris over the summer. There was a Turkish shooter who might be some sort of assassin and settled for silver because gold would look a little too suspicious. There was a French pole vaulter whose baguette cost him a medal, but perhaps the most talked about competitor was a breakdancer by the name of Rachael Gunn, otherwise known as Raygun. With this year being the first time that breaking or breakdancing was featured in the Summer Olympics, Raygun took the stage representing Australia and put on a performance that seemed to be at most at an amateur level, leaving audiences and crowds very underwhelmed. But what could have possibly happened on a personal and organizational level to allow this caliber of performance stand up at the Olympics? I got obsessed with this question. I wanted to figure out, is this a marketing play? Is it some kind of prank? Or is this someone who actually believes that they belong at the Olympics and somehow slip through the system? So in this video, we're gonna look at some interviews that Raygun did about the Olympics and look at her facial expressions, body language, and nonverbal communication to try to figure out, does she think that she actually belongs in this competition? Or is she aware that she doesn't quite measure up to the other competitors? And if so, how did she get to the Olympics in the first place? Now, before we look at clips of her interview, for those who haven't seen this performance, I want to show you a few clips so you can see what people are talking about. But the issue with that is all the clips that I'm finding online are being taken down. I think the Olympics are just trying to contain this story, so they're just giving copyright claims on anyone who's using this footage. So in a few seconds here, either you're gonna see a few clips of her performance before we see the interview, and that'll mean that it's fine, it was allowed to stay up, or it's about to just cut straight to her interview. And if that happens, it means that I couldn't play these videos, that there was a copyright issue, and I had to take that segment out. So either way, here's a clip. So if you're seeing these clips right now, it means copyright hasn't taken them down, and it's just a bunch of short clips demonstrating the things that people were talking about, where it seemed like her performance didn't show great athleticism or difficulty or anything that belongs on an Olympic stage.
Yeah, I'm working on new combos. I'm trying to, because one of my weaknesses has been dynamics, so I've been trying to get a lot more dynamic moves, a lot more freezes and power moves. Some of the stuff that's more Jeff's specialty, J-Attack's specialty. So whereas mine has been style and creativity and musicality, so I'm trying to kind of round out my repertoire a bit.
Okay, so in this interview, which was before her performance, but obviously after she was accepted into the Olympics, I think we're already getting quite a few clues as to her knowledge of where she belongs on the breakdancing skill tree or skill level. And let's start with some body language. So there's something we're seeing that is really important to note, that it's part of her baseline, because if I saw it in other contexts, it could mean something else. So she does this thing where when she's emphasizing a word, there are a lot of things that we do for emphasis, right? Some people nod to emphasize, some people use the eyebrows to emphasize. She has this thing where her chin comes forward like this in what we call a chin jut or chin thrust. And we see this chin thrust very often in this first segment. The first time it happens is when she says that she's working on new combos, and at the end, combos, as her voice goes up, we see that chin kind of shoot forward. The reason it's important to know that this is part of her baseline is because when I first saw that, and I hadn't baselined yet, it jumped out at me because chin thrusts usually, not always, nothing is absolute, but usually suggest some kind of conflict, confrontation, or maybe even a little bit of aggression towards something. So think about someone saying something along the lines of, "Can I help you with something?" versus someone saying, "Can I help you with something?" So the moment we said chin come forward, usually it's some kind of confrontation. But again, with her, at first I was like, whoa, I'm curious about what that was. But then I noticed it happens again and again. In fact, the second time it happens with an eyebrow flash, and then that chin comes forward. So it's literally her next sentence. She goes that some of her weaknesses have been dynamics. And just before dynamics, we get that eyebrow flash, and then dynamics with the voice going up, again, we see that chin forward. There's an interesting set of behaviors we're seeing right with that eyebrow flash and that chin thrust when she's talking about her weakness being dynamics. Just before dynamics, with the eyebrow flash, we see a head tilt, and then immediately as she goes, so right after talking about the weakness of dynamics, we see a slow blink, which is any time we blink for a little bit longer than you would expect a blink to take. And this is something that the research has shown when we close our eyes for an extended period of time, it helps us focus better, access memory better. And usually when we see this conversationally, it's someone trying to either keep a thought in or keep a thought out, trying to focus away from something or on something. So in this case, it makes sense. She's talking about a weakness, that there'll be this moment of kind of just not wanting to face the weakness and move on from that, which also makes sense with that bridging of like we're just getting along, we're moving on to something else. But that head tilt is also really interesting. Just before dynamic, that head tilt with the eyebrow flash. So whenever you see head tilt, again, there are no absolutes, but often, very often, it falls into one of two categories. One of them is skepticism or curiosity, anything that falls into that kind of, I'm curious about this, I'm inquiring, I'm inquisitive, this kind of thing. And that's usually accompanied with some type of scrunching like this, or some kind of question, like I'm interested to know this. The other category, quite often, is any exchange of sympathy or vulnerability. So whenever you're sympathetic towards someone, you might find yourself going, oh, I'm so sorry. Or if somebody is showing a vulnerability, you might see that head tilt. And the reason for this is pretty simple. Head tilting exposes a very vital area of the body, the neck. And in that moment of vulnerability, in that moment of sympathy, we're kind of showing that we're not a threat, right? In the exact same way that when we are threatened, we tend to come in and block this part of the body. Well, this is the opposite of that. So often in sympathy, whether it's a request or you're giving it, we see that head tilt. I also find it very interesting that this head tilt is happening at the same time as that eyebrow flash, because eyebrow flash is emphasizing. We emphasize things with the eyebrows a lot, but the research has also shown that we specifically evolved in that part of the face to help us with communication. We communicate a lot with the eyebrows, and in moments of social connection, we also see those eyebrows go up like this. So you might see someone request for sympathy like this, right? So think about someone saying, oh, please, like you can see those eyebrows going up because there's a moment of connection. And often it's quite clear why an eyebrow flash is there, but sometimes it's jumbled in that space between emphasis and social connection because they're both the same thing. They're giving importance to something. So in this case, what's interesting is it's happening at the same time as this head tilt. So I do believe that there's a subtle request for sympathy there. In her saying, look, my power moves aren't that good. They don't compare to other breakdancers, but give me a chance here. Give me a chance on the stuff that I am good at. So I think even before this performance in her head, she's very well aware that there are aspects of her performance or of her capacities that don't quite measure up to other people in the category. Now we're going to focus on statement analysis because I think there's quite a few things going on with her word choice, and especially a sentence that she cuts off and changes. So she says that her weakness is freezes and power moves, some of the stuff that and then she cuts herself off and says, this is the stuff that Jeff or J-Attack specializes in.
So I've been trying to get a lot more dynamic moves, a lot more freezes and power moves. Some of the stuff that's more Jeff's specialty, J-Attack's specialty.
I would love to know what the end of that sentence was going to be. Some of the stuff that you what? Because I feel like it was going to be along the lines of some of the stuff that you expect to see in a breakdancer, or some of the stuff that you think of when you think of a breakdancer. And I think she cut herself off because it's a tough position to go down. To say that I'm not good at the stuff that you would expect from a breakdancer, I'm good at this other stuff that you wouldn't expect. That's how creative I am. But I think there's a really, really subtle nuance if you look at overall what she's saying here that's quite important. And to understand it, you have to understand a little bit the language of breakdancing. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this, but in high school, I was obsessed with breakdancing. Obsessed. I loved it. And there's something that she's saying here that might seem like one thing, and then that would be okay, that's fine. But in reality, it's actually indicating something else. And here's what it is. She says that her weakness is freezes and power moves. And she goes on to say that, that's J-Attack's specialties. My specialties are style, creativity, and musicality. So later in the video, we're going to talk about how breakdancing is judged, because she's alluding to that a little bit when she talks about musicality and creativity. But before we look at that, let's talk about the elements of breakdancing. There are three of them. There are three components to a breakdancing routine. The first one is either top rock or up rock. They mean the same thing. It's when the dancer is upright and they're doing all the stuff where they're dancing like this. Sometimes they're taunting the opponent, but it's everything they do before they get down on the ground. That's one. The second one is down rock. That's everything that's happening once the dancer is on the ground. And this includes footwork, like when you see them walking around themselves, that's called six step, or you see swipes, or you see transitions, how they go from one move to the other, and power moves. Now, some classifications put power moves in a separate category, but a lot just mush it in there with down rock. And power moves are any moves that you look at and you go, holy hell, that looks incredibly difficult. So we're talking about when they do flares or air flares or windmills and their legs are spinning around. The things that look really athletically challenging, those are power moves, and they're part of the down rock section in most cases. Finally, the third category is freezing, which is all of a sudden, randomly, you'll see the dancer freeze in a position where usually their head is down, their arms are under them, and their legs are, crossed or out like this, and they're just freezing in a certain position. That requires quite a bit of athleticism to hold that position. So that's called freezing. So within these 3.5 categories, because power moves are sometimes their own thing, but anyways, in these categories, it's very possible to have a breakdancer who will say, for example, in my power moves, I'm really good at flares and air flares, but my turtle isn't so strong. I don't do that one that often. It's very possible to have specialties within these categories, but these categories are essential to every breakdancer. Every breakdancer has to be good at all of these categories. It's not an option. So when she's saying that his specialty is power moves and freezes, 2 of the 3 important categories of breakdancing, she's refocusing that her strength is creativity and musicality. But that shouldn't come at the cost of not being good at some power moves and some freezes. The best way I can explain this is this. In my own field, which is magic mentalism, I can very well say that my coin magic is terrible. I'm not a good coin magician, which is fine because within the bracket of styles of magic, I don't specialize in coin magic. I specialize in mentalism. That's what I do. However, if I tell you that as a mentalist, as a performer, one of my weaknesses is getting on stage and presenting to an audience. That's one of my weaknesses. It's this other guy's specialty, but that's not something that I'm good at. That's odd because that's an element that all performers, live performers, should have. Now, of course, within that bracket, some performers speak to the audience, some use body language and stage presence to command the audience. So it's fine. You can have a specialty within that, but the broader category, every performer has to have. It's the same with this. She can say, I do this power move really well, but J-Attack specializes in flares and air flares and this kind of thing. But for her to contrast power moves and freezes with creativity and musicality and create this binary where like, I'm not so good at this, but I'm good at that, doesn't really add up. Because any breakdancer should be good at all those things. And then they can have their specialties within each of those categories.
Now, I've got to congratulate you too on smashing the stereotype of a university professor as well at the same time. How do you combine the two? Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, yeah, look, I'm totally smashing both stereotypes really, aren't I? But it's nice to be able to push myself in different ways, and I feel really fortunate that I've had both of those opportunities. Yeah.
So this one's going to be more verbal analysis, what she's saying, because she's being asked here about her job as a university professor. And she has academically studied breakdancing. She wrote a whole thing about it. She's very passionate about it. And that's really, really great. She understands the science and the background of it, which is awesome. But in this case, she's saying that she's smashing both stereotypes. And I would like a bit of clarity on that because, yeah, you're smashing the professor stereotype because when we think of most professors, we don't think of a breakdancer. But how are you breaking the breakdance stereotype? Does she mean here that by being a professor? Because if we see most breakdancers, we don't assume they're professors. I wonder if she means something else. Like she's breaking the stereotype of breakdancing because, once again, she just talked about creativity and musicality. So by focusing on that, she's breaking the stereotype. And coincidentally, while she's talking about this, we see a clip of her, showcasing in a room. And just compare that to what we saw Jeff do, J-Attack, where he was doing these crazy power moves, transitioning from one to the other. And you look at them and you go, oh my God, like I would not be able to do that. And then we see her and look, there's some footwork that's fine. It's okay. But then we see some transitions that I think even to someone who doesn't know much about breakdancing, it kind of looks a little sloppy. And then she goes into this attempt at air flares, and it seems like she doesn't have that much control. And again, to someone who doesn't know much about this, I don't think that that is anywhere near as impressive as what he was doing. So it would appear so far with this interview, both with body language, with her words, and with this demonstration, that there seems to be a massive focus for her on creativity and musicality, which we'll talk about how important that is in the world of breakdancing. But for right now, it really seems like for her, she's overvaluing that component. Is it important? Let's find out.
What do your students say when they know now you're going to the Olympics?
Yeah, they're surprised. They think that I'm joking to begin with. They're like, yeah, okay. But then they Google me or something and they're like, oh my gosh, she is. and then they get on board and they tell me that they're going to watch me and cheer for me, which is really nice. So it's been really cool to see their responses.
Before we look at the body language here, and there's a really, really interesting moment, I really quickly want to state that this clip grounded me for a second, because you watch this and you realize this is a whole person with a whole life, and she's proud of what she does, and she tells her students about it, and she's excited they're going to watch it. And that element of it kind of indicates that despite the fact that she knows she's not, quite the same as all these other breakdancers, because we feel that difference, she still feels like there's something in her performance that's valuable, that she shares it with people that she loves and respects. So we get that element, but we also realize that there's a person there. And I don't want to contribute to bashing this individual. There's a lot of people out there who are looking for a villain. And there's some people who started talking about how her or her husband rigged or fixed the process that got her to the Olympics. And that was spreading quite fast. But several sources looked into that, and at least so far, they haven't found that to be true. So I'll leave a bunch of links in the description. You guys can go check them out, where a lot of people did a deep dive to look at what the process was and looked into these rumors. And so far, it seems like she got there on some type of fair game. But the point is, my goal isn't to bash her or demean her or belittle her in any way as a human being. I just think that in terms of dancing, she's not quite at the level of some of these other competitors. And I got really curious as to how she found herself amongst them. And I think that part is fair, right? Because when you're going to the Olympics, you're accepting to be watched and judged on a global scale. You're opening yourself up to that. It's not like I walked into a bar and saw someone dancing and I'm going, well, what's going on here? This isn't very good. She accepted to go to a place where being judged by the world is the standard. So I think that as long as people aren't like aggressively bashing or demeaning her as a human being, and they're just looking at this performance and going, well, hold on a second, how is this at the Olympics? I think that's fine. I think you open yourself to that when you make this decision. That said, there's a really interesting moment with body language here when she's talking about her students when they say that they're going to watch her. So among the festival of head tilts that we're seeing here as she's talking about her students, back and forth with her head, and remember, head tilts in a situation like this often suggest some sort of vulnerability, some sort of connection. And in this case, when she says how sweet it is that they say they're going to watch her, we see her eyes do something very unique. The eyebrows, the inner corners of the eyebrows go up and close together like this. Just the inner corners forming 3 lines on her forehead. So eyebrows go up for a lot of things. We talked about this earlier, but when you see just those inner corners come up like this, that is very consistent with sadness. And this is everywhere in the world. Research has shown that this is universal. Everywhere in the world when we're sad, the inner corners of the eyebrows go up like this. Just the inner corners, and this is something that's very difficult to fake. But in this moment, when she's talking about her students watching her, why would her eyebrows do something that is associated to sadness everywhere in the world? Well, the answer is quite simple, and it has to do with something called cute aggression. So notice how when you see something really cute, or not you, but some people see something really cute, like a little baby or a little cat, we either go to sadness, just aww, and we see this expression of sadness on the face, or sometimes we go to cute aggression, which is, oh, I just want to eat you up. And we go to like this angry place, like, oh, I just want to smother you. That's where our mind goes. And the research has shown that that's actually our mind trying to counterbalance the spike of positive. So in a split second, your emotions are going to a huge positive, and our body doesn't really like a quick change. So to balance that out, we go to an extreme negative to try to get that to come back towards the middle. So this is why in those moments of extreme overwhelming positivity, we get these sad or anger emotions. And that's what's happening here. She's touched by her students saying they'll watch her, and we see the telltale eyebrows of sadness. She's so touched by that we're getting that, oh, cute moment balancing this overwhelming positivity.
I entered the 101B girl, and we had an international battle guest from Japan, and I won.
While Raygun didn't start breaking until her mid-20s, moves like this might pave her way to the 2024 Paris Olympics, the first time a dance sport has featured at the Games.
There's a lot of stuff that you need to master in breaking. That's why the top level breakers are just so strong and so hard to beat.
So this interview was from a little bit before her qualifying for the Olympics, and there's a really great body language moment and also a great statement, like verbal analysis moment. So let's start with the body language. So she's talking about how she entered this B-Girl event, this breakdance event, and there was this international guest from Japan, and she won. Raygun won. And first of all, notice how this international guest from Japan, it's not this champion, this world champion, it's not this big standard, it's just this international guest. So it seems a little weird that she's overly excited for beating this international guest. You know, in most cases, would expect the person to say like, oh, there was this really big deal, like this very accomplished dancer, and I won that. So here, the win alone has a lot of meaning to her. Like it validates her somehow. But the body language is more important here. So after she talks about the win, we see two things in succession. So the first is a smile, and at the same time, we see the veins on the neck popping out. So as she's saying, I won, immediately after, we see this kind of thing. And this is something we typically see in a moment of excitement, but also when there's a bit of nervousness involved. So this is perfect. Like you win something that you weren't sure you were going to win. So it's exciting. Oh, it came close, but I got it. Like kind of excitement. So it makes perfect sense. But immediately after that, we see something we call a tongue jut, which is a very specific type of the tongue coming out of the mouth. So in that category of gestures, we have the lip lick, which is when the tongue comes out and just licks the lips like that. But you also have the tongue jut, which is more of a expelling motion. So you might see it like this when someone is trying to like expel a bad thought or bad idea, but it's also used to describe exactly that. When the tongue comes out like this between the teeth. Now, to understand the meaning of that type of tongue jut with the teeth, I'm going to talk about a book that I often talk about called What Everybody Is Saying by ex-FBI interrogator and best-selling author Joe Navarro. And I was having a talk with Joe Navarro last week, and we were talking about his YouTube channel, which is spectacular. It's right here, and he has a ton of free resources where you could learn a ton of great stuff about body language. I'll leave a link in the description. Please go check it out. Some incredible lessons there. But he has a part here on tongue jutting in the book, and I actually want to read what it says because it's kind of eerie. So it says, in social or business discussions, this tongue jut behavior, and by the way, there's a picture here where it's pretty much that exact same gesture. And it says the tongue jut behavior is usually seen toward the end of the dialogue, which is pretty crazy because that's exactly what happened here, right at the end of what she said. When one person feels he has gotten away with something and the other party has failed to detect or pursue the matter. If you see tongue jutting behavior, ask yourself what just transpired. Consider whether you may have been fooled or cheated, or that you or someone else just made a mistake. So he also goes on to say that we often see this when someone gets away with something or almost gets away with something. So it's really interesting that we're seeing this very particular behavior right here when she's talking about having beat this other international guest from Japan. Because typically this thing is like, it's a close call where something happened, I got away with something, something was wrong, something didn't quite make sense, and oh, it's like a mistake. So it's just so odd that in this moment she's talking about this win and we're getting this kind of tongue jut of like, oh, that was a close one, like maybe it shouldn't have happened the way that it did. It doesn't always indicate a definite mistake, something went wrong, but something may have, or something kind of did, or it could have. Along those lines, it's a close call, the tongue jut. And it's just very odd that we're seeing it right here when she's talking about this win. The last thing I want to talk about is what she said right at the end, where she said that there's a lot of stuff you have to master in order to be great at breakdancing. That's why the top level breakdancers are so strong and so hard to beat. And I wouldn't say that the language there is specifically psychological distancing, because she's not saying something like they are hard to beat, but in the way it's being said, it kind of suggests that she's excluding herself from that group of top level breakdancers. So you might hear me say something like, us mentalists are really passionate about psychology because it helps us with our profession. in a way that I include myself in that demographic. So here she's not really excluding herself, but it's like she's not saying, you know, at the top level of breakdancing, we have a lot of things that we have to master, which is why sometimes it's tough to beat us. It's not really that. It's like top level breakdancers, which is separate from me, that's the tone, which are separate from me, and then she says are very tough to beat. So she's talking about herself trying to beat them. Like this is something that's very difficult to do. So she's kind of, even in her language, distancing from top level breakdancers. So it seems from these clips that in her body language and the way that she's communicating, she has a real passion for breakdancing, but also an awareness that there's something different about her than other breakdancers. And does different mean different, or does different mean not as good? Well, to answer that question, we kind of have to understand how breakdancing is judged. And that gets pretty complicated, especially at the Olympics. Because if you go on the Olympics website, on their official website, there are two different articles, and I'll link both in the description, that talk about how breakdancing is going to be judged or rated, and they both talk about an entirely different system. One of the articles talks about the 5 criteria system, which is the one I've seen the most often, but then there's another one that's talking about 6 criteria, and some of the words are the same, but there are new ones in there that don't quite match up. And both of these are on the Olympics website. So it kind of seems like even the Olympics aren't sure how to rate or judge breakdancing. But without getting too technical, breakdancing to a certain extent is going to be rated based on someone's technique and execution, so how well they execute the actual moves and how good their technique is. Then you have things like originality or creativity, how original their moves are, but not just when they're performing, but also in the way that they react to the person performing in front of them. So sometimes you have very animated dancers who have these great expressions and really can get a crowd engaged, and that counts for a lot. Then you have musicality, which is how much they understand the rhythm and move with the beat and things like that. And then you have vocabulary, which is basically the range of their moves. You know, how different are their sets? Are they always looking more or less the same, or do they have a wide range of moves, which counts for quite a bit as well. But all that said, there isn't a specific base scoring system to where, okay, if you do an air flare, which is really tough, you get this many points. It's not like that. It's pretty much subjective. In the Olympics, it's kind of odd to have something that's this heavily subjective, right? Because if you look at, for example, shooting or archery, either you're going to hit the target or you're not. Or in running or swimming, you know, whoever gets to the end first, that's the person who won. It's completely objective. But then you have certain other events, like, for example, gymnastics or figure skating. And this is something where, yeah, there's a bit of subjectivity, but there's also base points. For example, if somebody lands a double axel in figure skating, that's X amount of points, 3.30, I believe. So that means that anybody who does these moves is going to get these points. There's a more specific system for grading. It's not just, what do you think this person deserves? But that's a question that has me very curious. And some of the viewers might know a lot more about the Olympics and athleticism than I will. Are there other events in the Olympics that are completely subjective, where the judge just goes, I'm going to give this score because that's what this is worth to me, without a base scoring system? Let me know in the comments if there's anything besides this. But what happens here is that it opens up a world of problems when there isn't really a standardized way to score and to say, okay, this is worth this many points, this is worth that many points. And clearly it wasn't a problem at the Olympics, but it may have played a role in her being able to get to the Olympics in the first place. And so for me, to figure out what happened here, it all comes down to a very simple life principle. And it's the fact that in almost every single field on the planet, creativity is only valuable if quality or difficulty comes with it. So as an example, you can have a chef who's really creative, who uses very creative ingredients, but if the end result, if the food is not tasty, if it's not good, that creativity is absolutely worthless. Nobody's gonna say, go to this restaurant, it's amazing how creative the chef is, the food is awful, it tastes terrible, but man is it creative, you have to go. No one says that. So in most fields in the world, creativity only has value if there's an actual quality that comes with it. There is, however, one exception to this rule, and it's art, especially visual art. So if you think of painters, right? There have been some incredibly talented painters who have like really great detail, but then in the modern art era, there were some people who got enormous fame and their works sell for a ton of money, but not because it's really like difficult, but because it's very creative. So names come to mind like Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko, who, if you look at their work that they're famous for, it's quite simple. It's not difficult to do, but there's something about it, about the creativity of it, about the idea of it, that people really appreciate and pay a ton of money for. Even in dancing, with modern dancing sometimes, it's not about the technicality or the difficulty, but more about the expression or the creativity of the movement. And I think the epitome of this phenomenon was a couple of years ago at Art Basel. I don't know if you guys remember, where a banana duct taped to the wall was sold for $120,000. And to this day, I have no idea what that was about, but a lot of people were talking about it as being this insanely creative, expression or something. I don't know what it is, but it would be hard to argue that there really wasn't too much talent there. Whatever the value was based on originality or creativity, I guess. And that's exactly my point. When you put that much importance on something like originality or creativity and have this standard that isn't really concrete, something like this might happen. It's probably very rare because she had to, qualify and go through several rounds or several events to get to this level. It's probably rare, but it can happen. So what I think happened is we have someone here who isn't technically as talented as other breakdancers. She knows this, but she overvalues her creativity, and for whatever those qualification rounds were, so did the judges. So the judges who were judging those qualification rounds saw her performance, and instead of focusing on, the things we normally look for, which is like really great technical talent, they focused on the creative aspect and said, we've never seen moves like this before, and devalued the technicality. Of course, it's important. It's important to have some creativity. So if you have a breakdancer who's technically really great, but on top of that, they have some creative moves and their musicality is really great, these are all good things. But you can't focus on one at the cost of the other, which goes right back to what she was saying all the way in the beginning in that first clip. When she was saying that her musicality and creativity is great, but her power moves and freezes are her weakness, what she's basically saying is that it's not that she has a specialty, but there's a vital component of breakdancing that is her weakness, but she doesn't seem to mind because she's overvaluing this other component. I think it's basically a participation trophy on the biggest stage in the world, where her and other people around her, and still people in the media now, are overvaluing things like creativity and a great spirit, which are important, but not at the cost of the actual skill. So when people are looking at this, trying to objectively find the best breakdancer, they go, no, you need the technical stuff. You need the tough moves. You can't say, and she's made the statement that I was never going to beat them on the power moves, so I went this different way and focused on the creativity. You can't do that. All these things are vitally important. You got to focus on all of them. So that's what I think of all this, and I think it's possible, not for sure, but it's possible that this will play in her favor and she'll get some branding deals because everyone's talking about it. And nowadays, as long as they're talking about you, those branding deals are going to come through. So that might be possible. And maybe that was a little bit part of the plan. Maybe she was aware that, like she said, her power moves and freezes aren't as strong. And that was a recent interview. So if she wanted to make headlines and turn heads, she would have to lean into this kind of, if you think about it, like modern dancing, just being really outrageous and trying to get attention that way through creative expression rather than the power moves and the technicality. So maybe that was part of the plan, but I don't think it was this massive prank or like this kind of, she's knowingly being really bad. I think she believes that this performance, this style of performance, does have a certain value, even if it's not as technical as the rest. But let me know in the comments what you think of all this, and do you agree with the masses that there really isn't a place for this type of performance on that scale? Or do you think that creativity is just that important? That even if the technicality isn't there, there might be something valuable here for some people. Would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.